Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Safety Connection. You've received an order from the Ministry of Labour Inspector. Now what? I'm happy to say that I'm joined here by Mr. Josh Fenwick. He's an inspector from the Ministry, Provincial Offences Officer, an inspector in Boston. We'll get into those a little later as to what that is. Welcome. We're going to go through a couple of housekeeping items just to get us started first, and then we'll go over the agenda and what the plan is for today. If you have any questions, don't be shy, put them in the chat. Thank you. So the prevention system, the ministry, we're always trying to gather intelligence to support workers and employers in Ontario. So there's a quick demographic survey that you can take. If you just take a picture of the QR code, you'll need the function number 232700 to complete the short survey. Again, we're just trying to gather some information. It's completely anonymous. We're just trying to always look at improving the services and the solutions that we have for workers and employers in Ontario. And completing surveys like this helps educate those solutions. So just take a second. You can click on the link or open the link. You should have received it in the email. And then you can always fill it out a little bit later on if you want as well. So just again, a little bit more housekeeping. You have your computer audio is recommended, but you can use your phone as well. There's a phone conference number available in the email you received. Your microphones will remain muted, and your camera will be off for today's session. So as I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with Teams these days, the world is increasingly virtual. But there's some reaction and engaging icons that you can click on along the menu bar to put your hand up, which might be a little tricky if your microphone's off. But reactions you can do and things like that. There are no polls in this session, but there are some chat messaging questions that you can just throw your answer into the chat. This is all friendly, and the goal is to help and support everybody. So please feel comfortable in participating that way. And again, if you are looking for some accessibility features, click on the three dots at the top, click more, follow down to language and speech, and you can turn on live captions. And that's the same thing. Go to view if you want a full screen view. Just follow the directions on the screen, and you can open up your screen that way. So what's the purpose of Safety Connections? What are our goals? Our goals are to share knowledge, share information. We do Safety Connections often on multiple topics. Obviously, today's on Ministry of Labour orders, but we do things like designated substance, do-it-yourself, women's sessions, things like that. So the goal is to learn and share with everybody to support, again, health and safety in Ontario. It's an opportunity to connect virtually. From either your home office or at the workplace. Makes it a little bit easier and connect with industry peers. You might see some of the questions and support that way. It's also facilitating conversation. So again, we're lucky to have Josh sitting with us here today, who's going to go into his bio a little bit later on to give you a little bit of his background, and then gives you the opportunity to participate from your home space and in the comfort of your space. So that's kind of the goal, the objectives, to try to provide information for Ontario. So today's session, we're going to go over a quick little introduction, provide a little context. We do work in Ontario. What's the prevention system all about? How many partners are there? Things like that. Then we're going to have Josh help us understand what the role of an inspector is, what the power is, what the tools they have. And then Josh was kind enough to create a field visit report. So if you've never seen an actual field visit report, we'll go through that in different sections. Field visit reports can be multiple pages long. So given the structure of a PowerPoint presentation, we won't be able to show the full page. So forgive us for that, but we'll go through it section by section and explain to you what's in each part. And at the end, we'll also include a notice of compliance, which is if you get orders, that's a requirement to complete. And then at the end, we'll cover off some resources, including the referral process that we have in partnership with the ministry, and explain how that works, and then we'll go from there. So we always speak to this as health and safety people. Even though we're going to be talking about legislation, we're going to talk about enforcement tools, powers, the role, et cetera. We're always looking to go beyond the minimum, which is the legislation. We're always advocating for employers and workers to go to a best practice, best in class management system. The legislation is a minimum. It's a great starting point. It's there for a reason. We need to meet the minimum, but again, we're always encouraging employers and workers to go beyond. Like I mentioned earlier, we're going to speak to the context of the prevention system in Ontario, let you see a little bit of who all the partners are and get some information that way and some context. And then again, we're going to get into more detail around the orders and sharing information that way. So this is the occupational health and safety system in Ontario, the prevention system as well. This isn't all the partners. It's just a snapshot of some of the partners. Obviously at the center is the Ontario Ministry of Labour, Immigration, Training and Skills Development. And we also have the Chief Prevention Officer, whose job is to work with the ministry and the system partners to develop strategies and plans going forward to support worker safety and employers. Then we have, things like the Institute for Work and Health. They do research. They're checking to see how well certain systems function, how they're adopted. We have, of course, the WSIB that, has the Health and Safety Excellence Program, as well as managing claims for health and safety injuries. Then we have our sister partners, which are like the Infrastructure Health and Safety Association, which manages power, construction, things like that. Public Services Health and Safety, which is education and healthcare. We have obviously Workplace Safety North, and then the Great Training Resources, which is the Workers Health and Safety Center. So there's a lot of system partners, a lot of resources dedicated to supporting Ontario workers and employers in Ontario. So this just gives you an idea of the number of partners and the number of players in the system that are all designed here to support us. So of course, the number one, role model for all of this is the Ministry of Labour. The Ministry of Labour has, multiple functions. They develop laws for health and safety, communicate and enforce health and safety laws in Ontario. They set standards. For example, the Joint Health and Safety Committee training standard sets out how many people, how you're going to get trained, what the content of the training is. They provide guidelines and information and support. So an example of that might be workplace violence and harassment. There's a lot of information provided. And then, there's measures and evaluations of the impact on health and safety. Like one of the examples we just did was the short survey. That's an example of that. But there's also a number of ways that they're collecting data to, anonymously to support workers and the system in general. So the ministry has 5 primary areas of responsibility: employment Ontario, occupational health and safety, employment standards, labor relations, and global talent and settlement services. Obviously, today's focus is occupational health and safety, and at WSPS, that's our focus as well. We're not really involved in labor relations or employment standards. So this is a snapshot, and you can see all the pages that we're selected on. This is my home page from the Ministry of Labour's website. I put this up here because there's a lot of great resources there. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of templates, solutions, understanding messages for like how an inspector does their job, initiatives and descriptions. So if you haven't been to it, go check out their website. There's a lot of information that's very valuable that can support workers and employers in Ontario as well. So you can see I've been all over that webpage and clicked on pretty much all of it. And just a quick snapshot of this is the Ministry of Labour's 24-25 annual report. In 24-25, inspectors carried out almost 70,000 field visits to 32,000 unique workplaces, and then issued over 100,000 orders for workplace, compliance and support. So we also have the Building Opportunities and Skills Trades Act, where 80 new health and safety inspectors completed their training last year, and then conducted almost 1,200 field visits and did a lot of compliance assistance as well. So it gives you an idea of, the activities and the things that the Ministry of Labour does through all their inspectors in the system that they have there. In WSPS, we are one of the 4 health and safety associations. Our sectors are agriculture, manufacturing, and service. There's roughly 4 million workers in the sector. It's our job to help and support employers. We're prevention only, so we provide guidance, information, and support. And any information that we share with an employer remains confidential. As part of a system partner, we do share metadata with the ministry, which means how many employers have we worked with, how many different types of training have we done, how many people were trained, nothing specific to an individual business. And Josh and I have worked together for 10, 12 years now, and anytime we're working with a client, we're always very careful to maintain that confidentiality from both sides, his side, our side, and making sure that that's protected. So, and again, I think I mentioned this earlier, when we're talking about legislation, we're talking about enforcement of these things, that's the minimum. We're always advocating that you go beyond, that you apply best practice, best in class, do everything you can to go and support workers and employers and supervisors in the workplace. So it's just something to note that we always kind of address. And so now we're going to, start sharing a little bit more information with Josh about the role, powers, and tools of an inspector. So this is our honored guest, Mr. Joshua Fenwick from the ministry. So Josh, if you wouldn't mind, give us a little bit of feedback of your background and your experience. And
all right. Well, thanks, Martin. It's not too often I get invited to talk about myself, but I'll try and keep it short and kind of on subject. I've been with the ministry almost 20 years now. Prior to that, I worked with the Rogers Group of companies. I was their safety advisor there for the eastern part of the country from Ontario onwards. I've enjoyed my time with the ministry. I planned on 5 years, and here I am almost 20 years later, still enjoying every an industrial inspector the whole time. If you go back 20 years, the industrial and healthcare kind of overlap more, but since then we now have more designated healthcare inspectors. So I stick pretty much in the industrial sector. My background, I came from Western University, then did the program at, I think most of us are familiar with the Ryerson program, although it's not Ryerson anymore. And then while at the ministry, I did my Master's of Science through McGill, and that was applied in the field of occupational health. So I think that kind of covers the professional background. I don't know if you want me to get personal.
No, let's not get personal. We'll save that for lunchtime. All right, thanks, Josh. So now we'll get into, just a quick question in the chat. How many people or how many employers out there have received a visit by an inspector in the last 12 months? You just throw it in the chat, and then it's just a point of interest. Okay, so we're seeing a fair number. So yeah, a lot of them. Good. Very well. So for some of you that have had an inspector visit, this will be a little bit of a review. You've been through the experience. For some of you that haven't, this will give you a little bit of insight as to what to expect, how the process goes, and we'll go from there. So great. Thanks for the response. Good activity. So Josh, why don't you kind of explain us a little bit what the role of an inspector is in health and safety in Ontario?
The role of the inspector is, there's a variety of things we're looking for, but essentially we're law enforcement and we're looking for compliance to the Occupational Health and Safety Act and the applicable regulations that fall under the Act. But in there is also the idea of promoting safety, promoting health in the workplace, and going beyond just talking about basic compliance. So you'll have inspectors coming in, they'll be looking for contraventions, but at the same time they're trying to just raise awareness of other hazards and things they're going to see that maybe you as an employer don't see. So we'll be visiting with facilities that have large resources at their disposal. Maybe they have an entire safety department and they have a lot to work with, while others we walk into, it's just the owner and a couple of employees. And so it can be very, very different kind of visit one way or the other, and our interaction can be very different in what we're talking about, what we're looking for. But at the end of the day, we are law enforcement individuals, and that's what we're kind of looking for, is compliance to the Act and regulations.
Right, and as an inspector, the Occupational Health and Safety Act sets out the powers of an inspector. What you can do when you step into a business. Things like, an employer, a workplace is required to allow you into the business, things like that. You can, we'll go into your powers a little bit more, but there's a lot of power and a lot of authority in order to support workers.
Yeah, I see inspectors with the ministry. We have some of the broadest powers in the province or even in the country, you could say, as enforcement officers. We have that ability to walk into any premise. And it's not that we don't so much have a warrant, we have kind of a blank warrant that allows us access for inspection purposes to look for compliance to the legislation. So we have that ability to just walk in unannounced, to do an inspection, to ask for documentation, to activate tools and machinery as we want to see it used. So yeah, we have some very, very broad powers under the Act. Yeah.
Yeah, and specifically, those are outlined on section 54 and 55, and then there's penalties, et cetera. We're not going to get into the penalties today, but under section 54, this is just a snapshot because there's multiple entries, multiple different levels of power, and when we go over the field visit report and the orders later on, we'll get into a few more specifics. I think you did a great job of coming up with a variety of orders so we can get a better understanding what they look like. But you can, for example, order testing on a machine, correct?
Yeah, this is the powers of the inspector under the Act are probably one of the more surprising things I run into with smaller to medium-sized employers who aren't familiar with the ministry. We're used to watching TV where a police officer needs a warrant to come in for an investigation. But we're coming in proactively or even in response to an injury as an inspector. We're just looking for compliance. And so under the inspection component, we can walk in unannounced and look for, and like you said, we can activate equipment if we want to know how a machine operates. Maybe we're not too sure, or maybe we're curious that something on it isn't working properly. We'll ask an employer to start running it so we can observe it. We can ask for documentation, training records. We want to see if things are being done like we've been told they've been done, right? So yeah, we have very broad powers, and that's usually a surprise to many of these smaller employers. Yeah.
And you can even go so far as to where it's warranted, issue a stop work order until something gets fixed or resolved.
Yeah, we'll see one of those later in the field visit I gave you, but we have a variety of different tools in our toolbox, so to speak. Whether it's an order that gets cleaned up at the time we're there, whether it's a time order, whether it's a stop work order, we have a variety of ways of working with employers to get things kind of into the position they need to be in.
And every situation is unique, and every workplace you enter has different hazards and different issues, right? So
every workplace has different hazards. Every workplace is different in the way they operate. And so as inspectors, we have these broad tools that allow us to work with employers, work with third-party consultants if they're involved, to reach that point of compliance, and as well as deal with but with hazards that come up that we run into while we're there.
Right, and in section 55 has some, additional support for inspectors when you're issuing orders on, sometimes specific circumstances. Like, for example, 55.1 is for a business that has 5 or less people. You can require writing.
Yeah, these are more out of the norm. Most of our powers that get enacted are under 54, but there are section 55 gives us the ability kind of to go beyond just the your set situation you run into. It gives us some flexibility with situations if we need to be outside of kind of what we're already dealing with. Like you said, if you've got a place with under 5 workers, but you want implementation of policies and other things that might not fall under the regular sections, it gives us the authority to then implement that as well. Yeah.
Right, so we have a great question in the chat. So the question is, we have facilities that require all people to shower in and out of our buildings. Is the inspector required to follow these rules when they enter the facility?
This is an interesting question because it actually came up at one of our meetings just recently within the ministry. It's not so much whether we're required to follow the rules. I don't know many inspectors who wouldn't want to follow those rules. For me, I'm in here to visit your facility to review your health and safety program. And if you've determined that, hey, part of our safety program is these policies, this personal protective equipment, these processes to ensure your worker safety, i.e. my own safety visiting, I would be following your internal policies. Now, on rare occasions, we may go outside of that. If it's not pertinent to the investigation or the inspection that we're doing, then we might bypass those. But generally, I don't think in all my years I've ever bypassed a policy other than photography. I like to think that if you've put these things in place for your workers, I'll generally follow them as well. Shower might be a bit of an extreme circumstance, but it would be case by case, and in that case, up to the discretion of the inspector and how it's relevant to the reason he's visiting that day.
Right, and I've been fortunate enough to network with quite a few inspectors, and we're all of the same perspective, right? We're there to support. It's about respect for people and respect for the workplace. So, to your point, very, very rare is it for somebody not to voluntarily, assist and participate that way.
We're not looking to put ourselves at risk out there, so.
Right, you're a worker as well, right?
Yeah.
Right. So then, Josh, how does an inspector decide what workplaces to visit?
So there's really two paths that we go in as. Either we're in there because something was called in. We call that reactive work. A complaint, a refusal, critical injury, fatality, all that reactive work. And we do a lot of that. That's, I'd say, probably about 75 to 80% of what I do. That's usually what triggers an inspection. Something's been called in by the employer or by a worker. An actual concern has been voiced, and then we're responding to that, whether, like I said, whether it's a complaint or whether it's a critical or fatality. The other reason we would be coming in would be a proactive visit. So those are, nothing was brought to our attention to the facility. We decided to visit, and that usually is under a provincial initiative. So we run initiatives throughout the year. Some are regional, some are province-wide. We just finished a regional one at the end of March, which was for secondary lifting devices. So looking into clamps and chains and slings and those sort of things. But that was just in our region. I believe we just started a provincial one, which is retail. So usually a proactive visit, an inspector will look at what initiatives are going on right now. They don't have any reactive work. They're caught up, we'll say, in the complaints and actions. They're on the go. And they'll go to do a proactive one. They'll pull up any initiatives that are on the go. And we have a slew of tools we can use to choose from. My personal favorite, I know my area. I've been in my postal codes for about 10 years. I drive around and I look under my initiative for visits to facilities that have never been visited before. So I'll go into my system. I like to meet companies and meet employers and workers that have never had the ministry in. And I'll do that under one of my initiatives. But we do have the discretion to really go anywhere. And, there's been times where I'll be at a McDonald's typing up my report before I go deliver it to an employer, and I'll see across the street, somebody on a forklift doing something they shouldn't be doing. And well, I know where I'm going that afternoon, right? And so we do have the discretion to go anywhere, but generally we follow initiatives or we're being reactive in response to a complaint or an accident. So
you have set plans, but with flexibility to adapt depending on what's happening and things like that, right? So depending on what you observe, depending on what's on, you might have noticed something in a similar business before and think, well, okay, maybe there was a contravention there. It might be the same here. So
that's the other thing. We'll do follow-ups on places that, every inspector has those certain companies that they know need repeat visits. You have others, you walk in and they'll be great. You may be in order, maybe no orders, and their IRS system, their internal responsibility system is working well. You're maybe not the best use of your time to be visiting them, but you know others that maybe are better off to be spending a couple hours in there working with them.
Great, that's helpful. That's a lot of good information. So then when you do visit a business and you're knocking on the door, what's your process?
So right off the bat, you introduce yourself. So that's always the first thing, usually a business card, who you are, your name. Then you kind of go into, you ask for who's responsible for worker safety. Generally, you try and get off to the side so you're not in front of everybody else, and you explain why you're in. If it's a complaint or something along those lines, you want to obviously maintain confidentiality. But once you've given the reason for your visit, and I'm going to preempt this by giving a bit of a disclaimer. This is how I handle myself. There is all the inspectors come from a variety of different backgrounds and experiences, and so you will have some variation between the way that different inspectors handle themselves and introduce themselves and work with you. But generally, we come in, we introduce who we are, we explain why we're there, and then we just want to get a feel. Personally, I like to get a feel for what you do as a business. Tell me about the company. Like I said, I like to go into companies that have never been visited before. So I don't know what's going on in the back. I don't know what you're manufacturing. I don't know what you're selling. I don't know what you're doing. So I ask about the company. What do you guys do? I want to get a feel for how business is going. I'll ask for a worker rep. So the worker rep and the management representative are there, and I get a feel for how everybody's interacting. And then we started diving into my first thing I look at is I start diving into the internal responsibility system, right? Under the Act, we all have our responsibilities within the workplace. You know, our supervisors following their things, is the employer providing the programs, the policies, the equipment. So I started looking into how everybody's interacting. I look into the Joint Health and Safety Committee. Are you guys meeting as required? Are the meeting minutes are there? I'll take a look at the minutes. I like to look at the minutes because I like to see how things are being handled. Or if you've met for 4 or 5 times over the year and there's nothing in the meeting minutes, it makes me scratch my head a little bit, right? So I want to see that there's discussions going on in the committee, that if hazards are being identified, are they being followed up with and dealt with? Are recommendations by the committee being addressed? And is that in the meeting minutes? And it starts to give me a feel for usually what I'm going to run into when I go and do the next part of the inspection, which is a walk around. And then we start walking through the facility and looking for hazards and looking for compliance to any sort of issues you might run into. So that's generally how I go. Yeah.
Right. So, and in that, there could be a broad timelines for how much time you're inside the workplace, right? So sometimes you can be there depending on what you find for longer, and sometimes,
I tend to go with the flow. So if I'm running into issues, I tend to start digging deeper. But if I find the internal, and again, I'm going to preface saying this is my personal strategy, but the way I run my inspections, if I'm finding, like we're looking for the IRS, we want the employer, the supervisors, the workers to be managing safety themselves. The ministry doesn't want to be the ones. That's not our role, right? So if I see you have a functioning IRS and hazards are being brought up and they're being assessed and control measures are being put in place, and then those are being reassessed for their effectiveness, and you have this circular compliance, circular control program in place under the responsibilities of the various parties under the IRS, and it's working, I tend to scale back a little bit on my inspection because I see you guys handling it, and is this the best use of my time? When it sounds like it's working, I do the inspection, it looks like it's working, I would probably say I could spend better time at another company whose IRS is not working, whose, the machinery isn't provided or the workers aren't being trained, and that's where I'll start digging deeper. So if I start finding holes in the system, whether it's hazards that aren't being addressed or whether it's responsibilities under the Act that aren't being followed, then I start digging, I start talking to more workers, right? So if you think of it along, an example might be, if I walk up to a line of presses and shears in a manufacturing facility, and I talk to the first worker and I see that the light curtains are in place and he's got a pre-use checklist and I see it's been done for the previous week, and I ask him about the press and he knows what a light curtain is and he can demonstrate its functioning for me, I'm probably not going to go and ask every one of those operators. But if I walk up to that machine and the light curtain's hanging loose and I ask him about it and he's scratching his head about what a light curtain is and there's no pre-use inspection, so I don't know how familiar he is with it, then I'm going to start asking him and start talking to other workers in a bit more detail to see what's going on. So yeah, I tend to treat my inspections I kind of reflect what I'm getting back. Yeah.
Right, so you start from a general perspective, looking at the IRS, which is the internal responsibility system that everybody has a responsibility for, health and safety in the workplace, and then you go to where you identify risks or identify hazards where there's potential, and then as you have those conversations, it kind of leads your next steps. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Okay, so we did get a quick question in the chat around the retail initiative. Can you get into just a little bit more of an overview of what you're kind of being when you're doing the retail initiative, what you look for? I'm assuming it's musculoskeletal disorders, workplace violence, harassment, probably the IRS too, it'd be the starting point, I'm guessing?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the question exactly, if they're asking about the initiative or what we're looking for, but the initiative is very broad. It's just a retail kind of focus. My area is very heavily manufacturing, so I don't have a lot of retail. But what we are looking for is like you said, if we are going in for a retail inspection, we're checking for, first off, always start with the IRS. Does the manager on site know what they're responsible for? Are they actually implementing that? Again, committee function, worker rep functions, inspections. And then once we get into the retail side, we're looking for a lot of manual material handling in retail, right? There's a lot of shelving, stacking, picking, and generally a lot of it is by hand rather than by machine. If I go into a factory or a warehouse, I'm dealing with forklifts and lifting devices, but in retail, it's a lot of manual material handling by hand. So we're looking for carts and assist devices. We're looking for making sure emergency exits and panels aren't blocked, that there's clear walkways. Slips, trips, and falls is a big one that, is always an issue. So, but this is, I believe this initiative just started, so I don't think many field visits have been done. I have only done, I think, one at this point, but generally for retail, that's what we're looking for.
Yeah. And again, as you mentioned, each inspector has, a postal code in an area, and that will be made up of different types of businesses, and you'll be able to, determine what you're doing from there, right? So do you want to get into quickly? So a restaurant would be, so there's a question in the chat around a restaurant, and same thing. So it would be the same process, right? You're starting off with the IRS, making sure if they have more than 20 workers, they have a joint health and safety committee, they have at least 2 members.
And it's restaurants are, I don't have too many in my area, but there's a spectrum of restaurants. You could be getting into a large franchise chain, or you could be getting into a mom and pop shop. Or you could be getting into like some of these, we bump into the fast food ones a lot for whatever reason. Maybe that's because it's the only ones that are in my area. But for restaurants, yeah, you always start with the IRS. The idea behind the Health and Safety Act, right, is that the program in place at the workplace is managed internally by the resources at hand. By the company, and then you go outside for specialty stuff, right? If you need to bring in a consultant for something you're not qualified to do, or you don't have the resources to do, but generally you want to be able to manage safety internally. So that's always where I start, and that's always what I'm looking for. And then we go from there. Specific hazards in restaurants, we're looking for, obviously handling of hot oils, slicers, guarding on those sort of things,
cuts,
slips, trips, falls, the handling of knives and sharps,
fire safety.
Yeah. So.
And the question was more around like you said, a mom and pop operation when there's 5 or less employees. So as a consultant, my conversation is always, okay, so under section 25(2)J, you need a formal program of policy when you have 6 or more employees. But when you have 5 or less, you're still responsible for the risk to the workers for health and safety. So my guidance to employers of that are that small is to make sure you're very clear of the ways in which somebody can get hurt, like what you mentioned in a restaurant, hot oil, sharps, fire safety, things along those lines.
We deal with a lot of harassment in the restaurants as well, so that's always something we're looking for. Making sure the policy program training's in place. Doesn't have to be formal in writing at that point with only 5 workers, but we want to make sure workers know how to deal with harassment, and making sure that management has it as a priority on their list of things that's communicated to the workers. Right?
Yeah, and if you have 5 or less employees, even though you don't have to necessarily have a program, it's still pretty well spelled out under section 32.0.1. So if you're in a restaurant of that nature, that's a good guide for you to follow, because that provides a lot of support for employers. And then when you are on site, there's again a question in the chat. They're saying, do you speak only with the Joint Health and Safety Committee members or the site manager as well? So I think you covered, did you ask for a manager or?
Wherever the inspection takes me. So I always ask, so we'll start by asking for who's charged for worker health and safety. That's my first question. After I've introduced myself, who is responsible for worker health and safety? HR, general manager, owner, it depends on the company, right? And then I'll sit down with them, and then I invite if there is a joint health and safety committee, depends on the size of the company, obviously, but if there is a committee, I'll ask for a worker representative of the committee. If there's no committee, I'll ask for the on-site worker rep. And if there's no worker rep because it's under 6, 5 and less, then I'll play it by ear a little bit. I'll look for workers and I'll talk to them throughout the inspection. But yeah, we're always looking for feedback from multiple parties. I'll talk to the maintenance manager when I get into certain things in that area. I'll talk to workers operating machinery, whether it's to ask for proof of training or just to get an idea of their level of knowledge of the program, right? So smaller companies, most of the programs are not in writing. They're informal, which is not a problem as long as they are good quality programs. But the only way to find out about them is to really ask workers and getting consistent answers from different workers on the program they're involved in.
And your process of learning a little bit about the business at the very beginning helps with, informing who you need to speak to and where you need to spend your time while you're there. So, that's a good, piece of insight that, you're first trying to understand what they do, who they are.
As well as as well as the nature of the reason we're in there. So, I'd be talking to different people if I'm in for a critical injury investigation versus a, proactive initiative. So, a proactive initiative will take me through the entire facility. With an investigation, if I'm in there in response to an accident, I'm generally sticking to kind of what happened in that case. It's not that if I see something else, I won't address it, but I'll generally deal with exactly with the investigation then and the circumstances of the accident, and then other stuff. If my spidey senses go off that maybe this place could use more of an inspection, I'll come back the next day or 2 days later, and then we'll do a facility inspection and kind of keep the two things a little separate that way. And yeah,
all right, that's great insight. Okay, so then what are the enforcement tools and inspectors? We talked about all the powers that you have. So then if you decide that you need to enforce those powers, how do you go about doing that? What are some of the options that you have at your disposal?
Yeah, we have a wide tool chest or tool bag, if you want to call it, of different options for when we run into a problem or a contravention in the workplace. And the most common one that anybody, well, not anybody, but the overwhelming majority, I think, of anybody who's had an inspector visit their workplace is orders. You don't always get orders, but you usually do. Most places there's something that usually falls between the cracks, and as an inspector, we'll write an order for that. We do have, as it says up here, compliance commitments. That's relatively new for us as inspector. It's kind of like a soft order, where there's certain circumstances where the employer has made the commitment of complying with it, and so rather than a formal order, it's kind of a compliance commitment. It's very specific situations, which is beyond the scope of this little training session, but it can be used, and it'll look kind of similar, but it's not quite an order. Tickets or fines. In my area, it is a capability we have of writing a ticket, $250 to $650, depending to worker supervisors or the employer itself. You see those a lot more in construction. With industrial, we have that option. You'll see it sometimes for safety glasses, things like that. But usually in construction, the employer is gone the next day, right? If you're dealing with roofers, you can't come back 3 days later because the job's done and they're gone. I know where my employers are going to be, where my workers are going to be. So I do have the option for tickets, and it can be used, and many of us do use it on occasion, although it's more prevalent in the construction industry. And then recommending prosecutions, that's a Part 3 prosecution, and that's where we lay formal charges, right? And then formal investigations conducted, and we find ourselves in front of a justice of the peace, where the Crown has laid charges for, usually in response to either an injury fatality or for non-compliance to orders that were already issued that just were not completed. Yeah.
Right. So lots of tools, as you mentioned, in order to do your job. Okay, so now we're actually going to walk through. Oh, hang on, there's a question. So does the inspector take along the initial decision for an order fine, or does it go to a team which evaluates and decide? Not sure. Does the inspector take alone?
Sure, does the inspector take?
So I guess they're looking to see, do you confer with people internally on decisions? And I guess unique situations, you might speak to your manager.
We have a whole slew of specialists available to us.
Right.
So it depends. I'd say 95% of the orders I issue are directly from me. If I run into a complex gardening order issue, or if I run into ergonomics or a very unique situation, we have both. We have hygienists, we have engineers, or we also have specialists within the ministry. So, I can give you I'll give you an example. So I ran into a unique situation where they were using like a rolling ladder as a work platform, and it was outside of the scope of what rolling ladders are used for. And I knew what had to be done, but because of a very unique situation, I conferred with a specialist we have within the ministry for working from heights to just confirm what I thought was the right response. And so then we agreed and went forward with that. But generally the orders are issued directly from the inspector, but we do have those resources available to us if we're not sure or if we want to just confirm with somebody. Yeah. Right. And in an extreme circumstance where it's a very, very unique situation, what we'll do is we'll go get the specialist to come in with us. And so you'll have an ergonomist doing the visit, and you'll have an engineer on site looking at it. And then we work as a group to kind of come up with the best order and the best timelines for compliance on that sort of thing. Yeah.
Right. So, okay. And there was a question about a new, under the Working for Workers Act, Part 7, Administrative Monetary Penalties. I'm not sure if 500,000 is the amount or if that's the amount there for secondary charges when there's been a subsequent serious injury right after. My understanding is the AMPs are still relatively new and they're still, like all new legislation, takes a little while to find its way into the field.
And the penalties that are levied there's multiple factors that contribute to determining what the fine level is going to be. It's not just contravention 500,000. It's what's the size of the business, what's the severity, what's the history of the company. If I have a company for an accident because a guard was bypassed, and then I go into their case file, and this has happened 3 times, well, then my recommendation and then the Crown is going to ratchet that fine up because of repeat offenses. If it was the first time, those sort of factors contribute to determining what the fine is going to be. Especially the size of the company, right? Like GM is going to be treated very differently than a local machine shop with 3 employees, right?
Right. So, the goal isn't to put them out of business. The goal is just to correct behavior that's not been satisfactory due to higher risk or serious injury, things along those lines, right? So it is to support, Ontario. We do need, businesses. We do need jobs for workers, and the goal is just to make sure everybody can go home at the end of the day and not necessarily to overly penalize them. So. And you and I have had this conversation before. Every situation is unique. You have up to 2 years to make a recommendation to gather all this information and intelligence on your investigation, right? So how often are orders challenged by employers? So we'll speak a little bit to appeals later on to the process, but it's definitely a remedy for employers. I don't know if there's detailed analysis of how many appeals there are in the course of the year. That's generally handled by the Ontario Labour Relations Board. So I don't know if we have specific numbers. You and I spoke about this before. You haven't had a lot of appeals on your orders.
No, I've had in like I said, near 20 years, I've had 1 appeal. And it was dropped at the meeting just minutes before going in. So it depends a little bit on, some inspectors may have a few more appeals than others. It depends a little bit on strategy. But I don't see them too often. Let's be honest, a lot of time it can be a lot of hassle. I don't know that this is the best way it should be, but sometimes it can be a real hassle to comply with an order. So some places will comply with an order instead. But yeah, generally there are appeals. They do go through and there are successful appeals. And I always tell it, as part of every field visit I do, I go through the process of appealing orders, and that there's a section at the bottom of every field visit, and we'll see it, to appeal an order through the Ontario Labour Relations Board. And I have, I don't know any inspectors that take it personally. So, by all means, if you think an order is unjust, feel free to confer with some specialists and then go into the appeal process.
We do have a slide that we'll speak to that a little bit more later on, but the next question is, the majority of our workers work from home. So what happens if you visit a business and there's nobody there or very few people there? And what if there's no one available to join for the inspector? So I'm going to guess that that's mostly an office environment. Most likely you need people in the manufacturing facility to run the machines. But
it's at the discretion of how the inspector wants to handle it. If there's only 1 or 2 people there, what I've done in the past, I'll speak to what I've done in the past. I don't run into this situation very often because usually we are looking for manufacturing and warehousing and facilities that have more hazards than your general office area. But I still, if I walk in and I want to do an inspection and it is just an office facility and they've only got a couple of people there, I'll give 1 of 2 options. If it's an office, I'm generally not worried about imminent danger and large hazards at that moment. So I have been willing to talk with the employer and say, hey, let's make a meeting for next week when a worker rep can be available, and with whoever makes the decisions and who has access to the training records for management is available, and then I'll come back next week. But that's at my discretion. If I want to, I can force the issue and still do the inspection and ask for somebody. I have done it where I've called up, they've put the owner on the phone, and I'll talk to the owner on the phone and I'll explain again who I am and why I'm there, and I can do an inspection. And if he wants to come over and meet me for the inspection, great, or I can leave the report with somebody there. And if he has questions, he can call me back. But generally, I like to have the decision maker on site with me, and I like to have a worker rep with me. And so generally in a situation like that, if it's an office environment, I'll make a plan to come back another day, but that's at the discretion of the inspector.
Right. So as we see in the chat, the next question is, do you have experience with ministerial labor orders? So it looks like we have, a number of people in the chat. in this session that have had orders before. So again, we're going to go through what a field visit report looks like, some examples of orders and things like that. So for those of you who haven't seen it, you get a little bit more information. Again, thanks for your participation. So again, Josh put together a field visit report for our location here at WSPS. It's 4 pages. Again, being on PowerPoint, I can't show the whole thing. So what I've done is broke it down into the various sections. So maybe you can just walk us through. So this is the top of page 1. Again, there's more parts to it afterwards, but just explain this is your initial information from the employer, right?
Yeah, and I'm going to stress this is my field visit. This is how I write my field visits. Right. Again, you have inspectors from different varying backgrounds. Some like to write more, some like to write less. I tend to write kind of in the middle, and I dictate my field visits based on the interaction I have with the employer. So if I feel like the employer is going to need a little bit more guidance, maybe they're a smaller business, they don't have the resources available, like an HR department to help them out, I'll put more into my field visits versus a larger place where if they have a department that knows everything I'm talking about, then I know I don't need to provide links to outside sources and all that sort of stuff. So generally this is, as you said, the top of the page. I call this kind of like the tombstone information, the company. If you're already in our system, so in this case, nobody had ever been to provide an inspection here. So I registered the company, and now next time another inspector, if they were to come here to do an inspection, they would find it in the system. So that stays in our system, and yes, the tombstone stuff. You have the case number and the field visit number in the top corner. Generally not needed, but if you did want to appeal an order, or if this was a larger than just a general inspection and there was an investigation and charges were laid, these are the numbers, the case numbers, the field visit numbers you use as part of your freedom of information request to get a copy of everything pertaining to the investigation, right? So in this case, you have the case number. If I came back tomorrow to do another follow-up, it would still be the same case number, but we would have a different field visit number, right? So after that, the address, the Joint Health and Safety Committee. In this case, there's an active committee involved. They're doing their meetings, their minutes. In some cases, that'll say inactive if they're in non-compliance, in which case then there'll be orders, or it might just be not applicable. So if you've got 14 workers, you don't need to have a Joint Health and Safety Committee. So in that case, it won't say active. Other stuff, I do a very, very brief summary, right? Who did I contact when I was in here? Who did I talk with? It's not going to be everybody. If an inspector goes around and talks to 5 workers, those names are not going to be in this section of the field visit. For me, this is generally who I talk to, who's relevant to a lot of the orders I'm issuing or the topics I'm discussing. So in this case, pretty much always a management representative and a worker representative. But if I talk to the general manager as part of the walkthrough, and they gave me information about the forklift certification program, I'd put them in. Or if I was doing an investigation and this was in response to an accident, and I met with I got statements from individuals, then I would include that in there. Right. So in this case, this writes up as kind of a dummy inspection. So I just put the 2 people who I would visit with in this case. Consider this kind of like a proactive visit. Yeah.
All right. And it's, if you can notice at the top, it says field visit type says initial, and then if there's another subsequent visit.
Yeah, you can have a continuation or follow-up for the 3 types. Yeah.
Right. So, and there's a question around what happens if the JHSE worker rep is not available? Would the Joint Health and Safety Committee management rep be sufficient?
So we afford the opportunity to a worker rep to go with us. It doesn't mean we have to have a worker rep to do the inspection. Every inspector wants to have a worker rep. If a worker rep from the committee is not available, generally, I still ask for another worker rep. So I ask, is there somebody else in the company, may not be on the committee, can they join us? We have to afford the opportunity, not mandatory. So if I walk in as a small business, there's only 2 or 3 workers available, they're in something really important, there's nobody that can join me, I'll do the inspection with just the manager. And the contact information for the inspector is at the bottom of every page of the report, and the report has to be posted for at least 14 days. So if any workers have questions about what happened when I was here, they're very easy to contact me as inspector. So yeah.
Right. So I think that answers the next question too.
Yeah.
So, okay, so the next part of the report is what's known as the detailed narrative. Again, I apologize for the size on the screen, but this is an important part of the order. So if you can walk us through what the detailed narrative is.
Yeah, that's some fine print. I didn't bring my glasses. So the detailed narrative. So our inspection, I always like to I like when I'm presenting my inspection field visit report to the employer and the worker rep, I generally say for simplicity's sake, it's a two parts. You have the narrative at the front, which is this, and then you have the actual orders in the second part. And I basically state that the narrative is what we talked about, basically in plain English, because like I said, I can have one worker rep and I might talk to a couple people, but not everybody is going to be there when I present my report. So I want to be able to communicate to the workers in the workplace what I was in there for, why I was there, what I saw, why I wrote the orders I wrote. And so this is the field visit that gets posted, and this is very easy for somebody to go up and read and say, all right, Josh talked about this, he talked about that, he issued an order for that. And so this is me kind of communicating to the management and worker rep that I'm presenting it to, but also trying to give information for everybody in the facility who might want to know why I was in there. So I try and keep it pretty straightforward, and I go through what I talked about. And this is my strategy. Different inspectors handle it different ways. Some might put more in their narrative, some might put less. But so in this case, I mentioned why I'm in, there was an initiative for retail, and I'm coming in response to that initiative, who I talked to if it was beyond the scope of just the people at the top. I'll go through, sometimes I always go through all the orders that are issued, but I'll also talk about other things too that I like to, if I see something that's being well done, I like to comment on that in the narrative as well. So, I did an inspection yesterday and they had beautiful racking, inspected regularly. They had the capacities up there. They were anchored in place. The safety pins were in place. Beautiful racking. And so I mentioned they had a good program. They were inspecting them regularly. There was no issues. And so I do like to put some comments in to support a workplace where the IRS is functioning pretty well. And there's usually a section I talk about the IRS. I mentioned that the committee was met with. They were familiar with the Ministry of Labor and our roles, and the committee is meeting regularly, that sort of thing. But in this case, I just went through, and I don't know if we want to go through them now because we'll see them again in the order format.
We'll speak to them in the orders next. It'll be easier to see as well.
So
it's just important to notice that the narrative is always included. Like you said, it gives the background. What's the reason for there? Say, for example, you were there because there was an anonymous complaint, and then just a quick summary of some of your findings and some additional information. Sometimes reasons, like you said.
Mine starts off with, like I said, the introduction of why I'm there. Then I go through kind of either the orders and the topics we discussed, and then at the end, I usually have a resources section. So links to ministry resources, links to our partners, such as working with WSBS, contact information for that will be in there. If there's a campaign going on with guides and resources that we're providing, I'll put those in there too. And if it's like I said, I tend to customize my field visit to the type of workplace I'm in. If it's a smaller place, I'll put links to the posters, I'll put links to the Occupational Health and Safety Act, I'll put a link to the guide on the Occupational Health and Safety Act. With a larger place where I know they have those resources, I won't go into that much detail. Instead, I'll just talk about what I talked about.
Right. So, and again, the goal is respect for the business and support, not necessarily just throwing around authority and things like that. You're trying to support them and help them, right? So we do have a question about, can the report be posted electronically?
That's a good question. I haven't had that one yet.
Don't think the Act spells that out specifically. It does say you have to post it in a conspicuous place in the workplace.
There have been allowances for other things going digital, safety data sheets, policies, procedures. But I can't give you a black and white answer. If you'd like, I could look into that and get back to you. And if that question, if you want, you can follow up with Martin later date and I'll get an answer for that. But I have not seen that spelled out as an allowance yet. So.
Well, I would imagine just to be safe, I would do both. I would post it in the workplace and then share it electronically with individuals. So that's probably just make sure you're covering off what you need to do. But the point is transparency, right? So once we're through the narrative, then we get into this is the bottom of the page. You can see there's a signature section where you're essentially whoever accompany you signs off with you and then it's kind of so that they got a copy of it and just move from there, right? So. And then the next section is, again, just a quick note saying that, employers are required to comply with the orders under Section 66. And then we get into some of the orders again, and it's hard to see. So I don't know if you're going to be able to
That's even smaller print.
Yeah, it's even smaller.
Each slide gets smaller.
Yeah. So again, I apologize for that. So put it on the screen.
Yeah, and I tried to put a variety of orders in here, so you'd see different types, the most common ones you run into. So
I can walk you through a couple of them. So the first one was for
It was the aisles, the materials in an aisle. So the scenario I ran in my head here is that I'm walking through the back warehouse area and there's a pallet or something, debris on the ground, materials being stored on the ground. They create a slip or a trip hazard to somebody, the workers going up and down that aisle. So in this case, I wrote an order, and the orders will follow the same format, and I'll walk through the format here. At the top of the page, again, you have the case, you have the field visit number, and you have the employer that the orders are being issued to. You'll see the numbering of the orders 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you'll see a larger number underneath it. And that's if you were going to file an appeal, these are the order numbers you would use for the appeal, not number 1, number 2, number 3, right? And then you see the type of order. There's different types there. The first one is a FORT, F-O-R-T, and that's a forthwith order. That's an order to be complied with while the inspector is there. So before he leaves, this is going to be taken care of. Right. And then the next one down is a time order that comes with a deadline, a time unknown, and a stop. And we'll get into those in a second. But you'll have the type of order, you have the legislation it's written under. So the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and in this case, Regulation 851, which is the regulations for industrial establishments. And the section it's written under, 11A, which is tripping, falling, and keeping areas clear, right?
Housekeeping. Right?
Yeah, housekeeping, yeah. So that's where that order was written out. And as a forthwith, you'll see there's no compliance date in the right column. Because it was taken care of at the time that the inspector was there. That's the definition of a forthwith order, right? So the second order is by far the most common order you run into, and these are time orders. So something was identified as a contravention, an action needs to be taken, and there's a timeline for that to be taken by, a deadline, so to speak. So in this case, it was a time order, it was written under the Act. Regulation 860, which is the WMIS regulations, and this is a common one that probably many have seen, is just for WMIS training. So in this case, the order was given that, most of the workers were observed to have had their WMIS training done recently, but in talking to one guy, I showed him a label. He couldn't identify with the label. Again, this is hypothetical. This didn't actually happen.
Sure, right.
But let's say this is how I usually assess worker training for WMIS. I will grab hazardous products, I will take the symbol and I'll go to a worker who I know uses that product and I'll ask them what the symbol means. And if they can give me a good answer, then it seems like their WMIS training was well communicated. Sometimes I'll do more follow-up. It depends on the products and the type of work and how hazardous the products are. But if I get a blank stare, and I'm going to be honest, I don't take the flammable symbol. I don't take the common, the common sense symbols. I take the ones that are a little harder to identify. And if I get a blank stare or a head scratching, then we'll look at, training for WMIS or refresher training. So in this case, not everybody had it. And so a time order was issued to redo WMIS training for those individuals who missed. I think in this case, it was a matter of those who were missed. But
so there is actually a good question in the chat, and I can speak to that a little bit. So if you notice in the order, it's section 7. So if you look at regulation 860 for WMIS, it says under worker education in section 6 and 7, it says if you work with or exposed to a hazardous product received by a supplier, then you need WMIS training, and WMIS training is outlined in section 7. And so a lot of online courses provide a great foundation, but then the employer also needs to verify within the workplace with their workers, the supervisor with their workers, and making sure they're familiar, like you said, with the labels, with the symbols, but also the critical information off an SDS sheet. And that's the kind of stuff that you can't get online because depending on the chemicals you have, it might not be something that'll be covered online. So, for example, an SDS sheet for a chemical will tell you what kind of PPE you need.
Yeah.
What to do if you get it on you or get it in you, whether there's a need for an eye wash station, things along those lines. So when you're doing online training, it provides a great foundation, but the organization, the employer, the supervisor need to augment it to the specifics in the workplace. Yeah,
and I don't have a problem when I walk in and they tell me we do our WMIS training online, but I then have a follow-up question. It's in the nature of the name, workplace hazardous material information. So either the online training is a part of the program and you're going to then tie it into the workplace specifics. Where are our safety data sheets located? Here we've gone through a couple. I want to see like a follow-up training session that was done with the workers to ensure, where are the spill kits? How do you know how to respond? Or the other online ones I've seen that are good, they're costly, but what they'll do is they'll work with the workplace to make it a workplace-specific online session. So it's kind of a unique course for them, right? But that's what we look for. Has it been tailored for the workplace? Because the generic WMIS is just a component of WMIS training, yeah. All right, so just another quick question. Is there a specific course I can take to become more familiar with the Act and the regulation?
So there's lots of resources online, lots of providers out there, but at WSPS we have a number of courses. One's called Health Safety and the Law. Joint Health and Safety Committee certification training goes in depth on different sections of the Act, how to read the Act, all the information there. So that's an option as well.
Yeah, I'm going to take my ministry labor hat off, although I'm probably not supposed to for this training session. But back when I was a consultant with my small businesses, I used to put my owners through the Certification 1 training session because it covers so much of the legislation and the rules, the responsibilities, and their liability. So I found it can be pretty dry, but it was a really good foundation for small business owners on understanding the scope of the Act and what they were really liable for. So
right, and it's 3 days, so you get a lot of information that way. We do have a question about posting the orders and how long they need to be posted. Do you know from memory when the 14-day posting requirement was established, or is it?
It would be from the day the report was delivered to you, which is supposed to be on the day of the inspection.
But how long has it been dedicated for a minimum of 14 days that has to be posted?
Yeah, 14 days. Yeah.
But how long has it been? Has it been 20 years since?
Oh, sorry, I didn't understand the question. No, honestly, I don't know.
Right, so it's probably for
as long as I remember, that's what I've been telling employers is 14 days because it's in the Act. I forget the section. I don't usually have to quote it. But yeah, it's.
And I've been to workplaces where they're 2 years later, they're still posted.
Yeah. I'll see reports from previous inspectors. I've been in the area, the one I'm in for 10 years, and I'll see previous inspectors' reports posted on various boards that have been up there for ages. Yeah.
Right, and the goal is just to make sure everybody's informed and everybody understands what, that there's some compliance demands that, that the organization needs support with and things like that. So it's more around just providing information from people. Another question, we keep digital copies of employees' health and safety certificates, ladder safety, etc. Do I need to keep printed copies as well?
You want to feel that or me? No, it doesn't matter as long as you can provide, proof of training. Printed copies and digital copy. Digital copies are nice if you have a software system where you can pull it up on your phone and show an inspector very quickly if they're asking for it from an inspector angle. But as long as you don't need to. Either one or the other is perfectly adequate. It's just kind of what works best for your system.
Look at all the help we're getting in the chat. Thanks, Monique. You posted it section 59.3, so you're helping us out here. So, yeah, and then going back to the sign-offs and the training records, we spoke about this before, where training is under 25.2A, which is they have to provide information, instruction, and supervision for the safety of the worker, and these sign-off sheets, these training records, that's the information. So they need to follow up with the other two aspects.
Yeah, and training is probably the most frequent charge I've laid over the years. It's almost a company, regardless of what happened in the accident, poor training or lack of training is probably the most common, if not the main charge, it's one of an accompanying charges, right? So having that thorough training and then having proof of training is also very important, yeah.
Right, and again, to follow up on that, it's not just the in-class or the sign-off and the course they took, it's the follow-up, the supervisors providing the instruction on whatever it is that they're learning about. Say ladder safety was an example, so making sure they know how to use the ladder safety safely in the warehouse or wherever they're using, and then on occasion supervise them and make sure that they're following those directions, right? So there's the three parts that it's very critical. What if the employee did not identify the pictograms, but he has a good training record of WMIS? Is the employer responsible?
Yeah, so you're asking basically when you're getting there at competency of training. If I talk to a worker, no matter how much training he's got, if he can't tell me the pictograms, then that's not adequate. He needs to be properly educated and informed. Maybe what I would then be asking is, well, what's his predominant language? What was the training provided in, right? And I work in the GTA, so I work with a variety of different first languages, and yet all the training is always delivered in English. And so what I would be looking for is, all right, well, if your employee has been trained and we still have a problem, where is that disjoint? Why did that fail? And that's what I'd be looking for the employer to fix. Yeah, because the legislation's pretty clear. The employer's responsibility is to provide training to their workers. And like I said, a charge that's frequently laid is because the training either didn't take or wasn't trained to begin with.
Yeah. So there's a question about using Google Forms, and I think you kind of respond to that too. It doesn't really matter whether it's electronic or hard paper that they have. They still need to produce it, and then again, they need to support it with the instruction and supervision as well, right? So.
Yeah, no, what works for the employer? Like I'm there as an enforcement component, right? I am not going to tell you how to track your training. I'm not going to tell you how to track your policies and procedures. I just need those to be in place as per the legislation, as per the act. So it's whatever works for you best in the workplace to make sure that that functions, right?
Yeah, and at WSPS, that's part of our role, is to support the workplaces, provide limited guidance and limited information that way. So, do you know of sites or training available in multiple languages? So, if Megan, if you're okay, just send in a consultant request to WSPS. If you go to our website and there's a contact us page, you can put that forward in there, and somebody will reach out to you and do our best to support you. Is it acceptable to post a QR link to the current act and regs as opposed to buying physical copies? So you spoke to this earlier about some of the electronic changes that were made. I believe it's acceptable now. I think COVID had a lot to do with that, where maybe not everybody was in the workplace and things like that. But I believe as long as they have access to it.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot more policies, procedures being put on digital format, shared folders, and like you said, remote work sites allows that to be more accessible, especially the small working from home individuals. So yeah, they have made allowances for digital acceptance of policies, procedures.
Yeah, I think they're talking about having the fact that you have to post a copy of the act and the regulation in the workplace.
Yeah.
So electronically is a viable way of doing it.
We're seeing that more and more, like a shared folder or something. Yeah.
Right.
But that has to be accompanied by training of workers to know, so they can tell you where it's located.
Right.
And it has to be printable. They have to be able to, if need be, get a copy of it.
Right. The important thing, like you said, the important thing is everybody needs to know where it is and how to find it. Right. So, did we want to continue going through the orders, or which where we? I think we stopped with the which one. What's the?
So the third order is what we call a time unknown order. So I tied this one, if I believe, to racking. So I walked into the warehouse, damaged racking to the point where the capacity of the racking is compromised. And so in those cases, an inspector will frequently write a stop work order on the racking and require it to all be unloaded. And that's hence the next order, which is linked to this one. So 3 and 4 go together. 3 being the actual contraventions, the damaged racking, and 4th being an order to stop use of that racking until the racking is either repaired or replaced. And we don't govern whether you're going to repair or replace it. If you are going to repair it, it's got to be done properly. Obviously, you can't just slap some supports on it and off you go. It's got to be properly inspected and its capacity verified. But that's what the stop is, along with the time unknown. And you'll see those periodically a lot with machine guarding and things like that, where a worker is in imminent danger of something going wrong because of continued use of that machinery or that device. So, yeah.
So just quickly, I think we already answered the question about the Green Book. Yes, it is acceptable to have it electronically, but workers need to know where it is and how to get access to it. I think that was a recent change, and again, I think precipitated by COVID and some of the changes that way. And the advent of e-laws it's a great source and sometimes easier to find, but so I think we covered that as well. So okay, and then is that it for those orders? Those are covered. So I think there's one more we have.
The last one is, this one's less common. I use it on some occasions and usually tied to the most common one being what I wrote it for is joint health and safety certification training. The inspectors have at our disposal the option of issuing a time unknown order. So there's not a compliance date attached to it, but we'll issue you a plan with how you're going to comply with it. So one of the problems we run into when we issue the order for certification training is that training is, a lot of places, they won't even give you a date until they get a certain number of participants in the training course or something like that, right? And so it's hard for the employer to comply with a hard and fast date when they don't know when the course is going to be available. So what I always, in those cases, I'll issue them a plan order to go find the training you want to take, find the date it's going to be held, and then I'll come in, comply your plan of when you're going to do it, and then change the timeline for the certification to that date. So very complex, big. You don't run into these too often. It's usually more complex and bigger orders that might take a lot of work going into it. The inspector will say, all right, I can't really dictate a timeline for this to be done because it is quite complex. So come back to me with a very detailed plan on how you're going to comply with this. If it's going to be complex guarding, who's doing it, what stages is it be done with, what are the interim measures you're going to be using in the meantime to allow the machinery to run, right? So that's what we'd be looking for. And then we reflect the order in the timeline that we kind of work with you to find that works for both parties or everybody involved.
Yeah, as you mentioned, it's typically a little bit more complex. I've seen orders where they need to put together a plan on how they're going to do training. So this particular location, this business didn't have much in place at all for training and policies and et cetera. So the inspector gave an issue to come up with a plan on how they're going to go and develop it.
And inspectors are going to be different. Some don't like using the plan. Some will prefer to put a timeline. And if the timeline doesn't work out, they'll come back and talk to you about an extension. But it is another one of those tools that we have at our disposal to work with the client and on what works for everybody involved. So,
thanks, Tricia. Thanks for posting that in the chat. And I like your name, Martin. Okay, so then now you've got these orders, and then the next step is the notice of compliance. So again, it's pretty much going through. You have the order, as you mentioned, there's the different categories and pieces of information. But once the employer believes they've complied with the order, they're going to fill this out and submit.
So again, personally, this is one of my pet peeves is not getting these back or getting them back incomplete because that requires additional follow-up. But it's more something that people are focused on complying with the order and kind of, all right, it's done, kind of forgetting about the notice of compliance form. But this is how you communicate with your inspector that something is finished within the timeline he's left or she's left, right? So the notice compliance form provides a little bit of space. You might need to add, I think of these kind of as like the old school fax cover sheets. I'm going to date myself here a little bit, but I try and tell clients, think of this as a cover sheet and you're going to add supplemental additional information that you're going to refer to in this. So for example, the first order there, the time order for the WMIS training, I would say you would put in there WMIS training provided May 3rd, see attached attendance sheets. And then so you'll include the attendance for the 5, 10, 15, 20 workers that signed off on the WMIS training, right? So, and then so you fill out the middle section. On the right column, there's a section for the worker rep, the joint health and safety rep. That has to be filled out in order to confirm what has been written in the middle. So if the middle says WMIS has been completed, the worker representative from the committee, or if it's under 20, just the worker representative, would agree or disagree, check off the box, and then put a signature in there. And then that order can be sent in with the extra, or sorry, that form can be sent in with the extra documentation for the compliance of that order. So the inspector could say, all right, it's done, I don't need to follow up, or it's done, but I still want to come in and follow up. And that's at the discretion of the inspector. Yeah.
And so there's a good question in the chat about extension. So what's your perspective? And again, as you mentioned earlier, it's always at the discretion of the inspector, and each inspector does it a little bit differently. But what if we're working with a client and the client needs an extension on the orders? What's your perspective, your position on that?
Yeah, I'll start with the via phone, email, or both. There's no real right or wrong way to ask for an extension, but I would always advise to have it in writing. As inspectors, there's places I'll write 20, 30 orders to. There's places I'll write 2 or 3. But if you think about the number of places I'm visiting, that's a lot of orders that I'm trying to manage. So I like to have it in writing so that I can find it. But also as a client, in case it slips the inspector's memory, you've got it there. And you've got it in writing via email or whatever format you want to use. But I would submit the request, phone them up too, talk to the inspector and explain. But when asking for an extension, it should be justified. So for me, if somebody calls me up and say, hey, I gave them a month, let's say, to do the WMIS training, and it's the day before it's due, and they call me up and they say, hey, we started calling around today to get the WMIS training done, and we can't find anybody who can do it on short notice. Can I get an extension for a month? I have a problem with that. Well, you've had a month to work on this. Why have you not been working on it? So I'm going to say, no, I'm not going to give you an extension. Get the WMIS training done. It's going to go in non-compliance, and we'll talk about that after, right? But if you call me up and you say, hey, look, we had a trainer booked. He just called us this morning. He's canceled on us because he's sick or for whatever reason he can't make it. He wants to reschedule to June 5th. Can I get an extension June 5th? Absolutely. You did what was reasonable to comply with that order, and circumstances beyond your control change the situation. So personally, that's when I have no problems, issuing an extension, and I'll send an email with that extension, just saying yes and why it was granted. Yeah.
Yeah, and that goes back to what you were saying, the relationship of the employer, their history, how they go about doing things.
And and this is why we've talked about it, but stressing the I've always been a bit confused why I don't find many employers will call me up for more information about the orders. I love talking to my employers so that I make sure they know what's expected and they do it right the first time, so we're not wasting each other's time and energy. You know, it's frustrating if I have a client who I issued an order for, they put a bunch of measures in place that cost them time and money, they come back to me and I'm like, that's not what I was asking for. Maybe there was a miscommunication along the line, but you have the order in writing, you didn't read it very clearly, or you missed something. And so now we wasted your time, your money, and you still have to comply with the order. So I am always open for phone calls and emails and clarifications, and I like talking to clients to make sure we get it right the first time. And I don't know many inspectors that have a problem with that. So I always encourage clients to call up the inspector if you have any questions or any confusion about your order, and get it straight from them so there is no problems down the road.
Yeah, so the answer to your question, Caesar, you're calling or connecting with the inspector that's left the orders behind. So
yeah, and that contact information for the inspector, they'll give you the card, but it's also on every page of the report, and you can see it right at the top of the notice of compliance form right there. So very easy to get a hold of inspectors.
We have a quick question about, so this, let's just say from the time that you did the walkthrough and you had a certified worker rep with you, and then the next time you came back, that certified, or by the time they were complying with the orders, that there was a change in that rep left. Doesn't matter who's signing it.
Yeah, it's just a worker representative is kind of confirming what's been said by whoever filled out the form here. Generally, it's the management rep or the HR or the general manager for the plant, or whoever filled out the section in the middle usually represents management. And there's a section, I don't know, is there another part to this slide, or is that, okay. At the bottom of this form that you don't see is, at the bottom left is a section for the management representative to sign off once all the orders are complied with, right? So the worker rep, whether it's the certified worker rep at the beginning or another one, as long as somebody is confirming what was done in the middle column, the action that was taken to say, yes, this is what was done. Yes, the attached documentation is the supporting documentation. I agree, yeah.
Okay. So that covers the orders and notice compliance. Now we're going to get into a little bit more of the, okay, so you got an order, what do you do? So again, you have to post the order in conspicuous space. So we went over this, we kind of just spoke to that. But we approach it, and you and I have talked about this too, you tend to look at an order as an opportunity, or as you like to say, a learning experience for employers, right? It's not just, punishment, it's an opportunity. There was a gap, and the order gives them the opportunity to improve that and increase the worker safety.
Yeah, we should all have the same priority, and that's for a safe workplace for the workers, right? So when inspectors coming in, whether it's proactively or because of an accident, we want to find out why it happened and how can we try and make sure it doesn't happen. And if it's a problem with the IRS, make sure other things that could have spidered out from that don't happen as well, right? So the goal is to find these, whether it's a hazard or to find a deficiency in the system and deal with those, right? So yeah, we should all be on the same page for it.
Right. So, and make sure you read it carefully. All the information there, we just went through the order. Make sure you read it and understand it, and be clear as to what's required there.
And reach out. And if you have a consultant working on your behalf, encourage the consultant to reach out for assistance too if they're not too sure exactly what's going on, right? I have no problems talking with a third party if they've been hired on behalf of the company to help them reach compliance. So, yeah.
Right. So then again, once you have the order, then you're going to start checking how you're going to comply. So a lot of orders can be complied by individually in the business. You can take care of it again, read the requirement. So again, if it's a joint health and safety committee, you need to get people trained. You Google joint health and safety committee certification training. You'll find lots of resources there. So a lot of these orders you can do yourself. You just need to allocate a little bit of resources internally. Somebody's going to have to work them, find the information. So it's a do-it-yourself as much as can. And then sometimes you might need assistance. So for example, say there's an order for a hygiene assessment, and it might be silica in the workplace. So you're going to need a competent person, somebody who's qualified to be able to do that assessment and do it and follow a systematic approach that follows, the regulations and the process. So you might need an external resource for that. So start your process if you have an order for that soon to start again, to your point, start gathering information, start to make a reach out I know hygiene is in high demand, so it's oftentimes difficult to get somebody there quickly. So start that process early. And then WSPS, you can always reach out to us. We do have a support system with the ministry. It's a new referral process that we have. So then you can reach out to us, and again, confidentiality is maintained. We'll go over that referral process, so you can reach out to us and we can support you and provide guidance. So then again, as we mentioned earlier, you need to post the orders in the workplace. So we kind of already went over that. So if an inspector asks a worker to identify a safety data sheet pictogram, and there's a language issue, but the worker can show you the pictogram on their phone, is that acceptable?
I was trying to figure if I understand this question. So
maybe they'd use the phone to translate. I'm not sure either. So,
well, the issue, again, it would get down to the root knowledge of the worker. Is he using his phone to identify the pictogram, or does he know what the pictogram means and he's using the phone to communicate with me that he knows it? We're not relying, like WMIS training is not about, knowing that I can go to my phone to identify a pictogram. I should know what that means. So ideally what I would be looking for is that the WMIS training was provided in his native language. If not, then in English, but with assistance, like with a translator, they can help him work through it. I've seen that a few times, so that he understands what the pictogram means in any language, right? So
right.
That would be the root goal.
And that's the goal of having a picture, though, right? It's not necessarily language specific. So, okay. So we did speak about appeals before. So again, the appeals are managed through the Ontario Labor Relations Board. There's their website. There's two parts to it. There is a guide, a bulletin number 21. So if you Google how to appeal an orders, you'll find these guides, this information. I have appealed an order in the past when I'm private consultants. What I will say is that, like you mentioned, you have 30 days from the date of the order, but also the appeal could take 6 months. And my understanding is you have to comply with the spirit of the order, the safety requirements of the order in the interim while the order appeal is being heard. So if there's a specific risk of injury to a worker, you can't ignore that just because you're appealing the order. You still need to ensure that the worker's safety is there. So that's important.
Yeah, and you'll be coordinating with the inspector, because they're going to know you're appealing it, and you're going to be looking at interim measures and stuff in the meantime. So
right, interim measures is kind of the better language. So again, if you're looking at or you're considering that, Google's your best friend. There's lots of information. Go through the OLRB, you can find that. So quickly in summary, view orders as an opportunity and a learning experience. Seek clarity. Don't hesitate. Reach out to the inspector. If you're not sure, you can do that. Start looking at the resources you need to comply, whether it's internal, external, and then again, you have remedies like the appeals.
Yeah, I'll stress the considering orders an opportunity or an inspection, a proactive inspection by an inspector. Take it kind of as an opportunity to get a free check on your internal responsibility system and the program you've implemented. Right, as inspectors, I don't have any red flags with issuing orders. Everybody gets orders. The only area where an inspector starts to get a little frustrated is if they start seeing the same issue over and over again. So I'm in a month ago and I issue an order for guarding because something was askew on one of your guards, or something was off. And then I come back another month and there's another problem with guarding. And I come back another month and there's another problem with guarding. Now I'm going to move from orders to tickets or to prosecution because of a repeat offense, right? What we want to see is you learn from the orders, and that's what we say. This is an opportunity to learn from it. And most inspectors are going to be very happy to kind of work with you. And we do have resources kind of available. We won't tell you how to fix problems, but we'll help you in guiding you in some areas. And we do have professional help with engineers and ergonomists at our disposal for complex situations. So if take it as a chance to an outside spot check on your program or on your system, and you might get orders, and that's fine. That's an indication of, all right, we found a spot where we can improve on, and let's continue that improvement, right?
Right, great. So just to answer a question in the chat, yeah, Jen, we do have resources on our website that are in multiple languages. Not everything is there, but there are quite a few that support. Obviously, French is a big one, but we have some resources that are in the 5 top languages in Ontario. But again, if you don't find what you're looking for, just reach out to WSPS and somebody can try to support you that way. So. And now again, some more of the resources that are available. So this is a new program that's been launched between the ministry and WSPS. And it's developed a new approach to, again, support employers and workers in Ontario. So you always have, again, the option of completing the orders on your own. There is no, if you do get an order and the inspector puts WSPS's contact information, you're not forced or compelled to reach out to them. Matter of fact, Josh and I have worked together quite a few years, and there's often times where he'll put WSPS contact information and the employer determines that they can do it on their own or goes a different route, and that's perfectly acceptable. If you do reach out to WSPS and we start assisting you, again, you and I talk about this all the time, there's confidentiality. You need to protect the information on your side. I need to protect the information on our side in terms of assisting the employer, so we never cross over that line. If you are using the referral process with WSPS, we will need a copy of the order. We will need to see exactly how we can assist you. And then from there, there's lots of free resources that you get through that referral process. There's some free consulting. It'll depend on the nature of the order. There's sometimes exemptions, like for example, certification training is not included in that free resource. But if you have, say, an order for a workplace violence risk assessment, we'll go on site, we'll do that for free. We'll provide that risk assessment for you and with you, of course, because we need your support. And then there's other things like a hygiene assessment we touched on. It's mostly free. There's a fee for labs and equipments and things like that. We pass that on, so it's not entirely free, but it's heavily discounted. So again, we're trying to support employers that way through this program. And then again, there are certain things that WSPS can't do. You mentioned machine guarding. We don't do machine guarding installing of any kind like that, but we'll do a machine guarding assessment or, support them in terms of what they need to do with the machine guarding. We have courses on PSRs, pre-start reviews, but we actually don't do PSRs. We don't issue engineering reports, things like that. So there are some limitations for how we can help, but for the most part, we're in there, we're supporting you, and there's a lot of free resources that go with the referral process. And if there's a reason to connect with an inspector, I will always ask for permission from the employer in writing. They'll send me an email saying they grant me permission to speak to the inspector. Again, if we're looking for some clarity or letting them know that, we're doing a hygiene assessment, it's just going to take us a little longer to get a hygienist available, things like that. So prior to reaching out to an inspector, we seek permission in writing from the employers. That's part of this referral process as well. So again, if you have any questions, go through WSPS. There's a contact us page. Just send in a consultant request form and somebody will contact you and support you that way. So this sort of follows up what we're just saying. There's lots of resources at WSPS that can support you. So just check out our website. And I mentioned earlier, the Ministry of Labor has a lot of great resources too, free templates, guidance, guidelines, and things like that to support.
I was going to address one question in the comments there. It was talking about CCOHS, and they do have great information as well. Just keep in mind the CCOHS webpage covers federal and the other provinces as well. So if you are pulling information from CCOHS with your programs, just double check that it is for Ontario.
Yeah, absolutely. Each province has their own legislation, and CCOHS covers a lot of the different ones, including federally. So yeah, you need to make sure that your compliance is specific to the legislation in Ontario.
It's all very similar, but there are differences between some. I came from, when I was working with Rogers, I came from the federal side, so I've had to deal with the different provinces and versus Ontario. So just double check that one thing. Yeah.
Okay. So if there's no other questions, it looks like we're getting a lot of positive feedback. Thank you for your comments, and thank you for participating today. And thank you, Josh, for always being willing to share and to participate and to help out. I know I've leaned on you many times for questions, and thank you for supporting Ontario workers and employers and helping them improve their health and safety programs.
No, happy to be here. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.